Welcome. I'm Dan Estrada. It's February 21st. It's Tuesday. This is Engineering Ethics at NJIT. We are in lesson 6 this week. Let me go ahead and jump into the lesson and see what we're looking at. All right, here we go. Okay, so we're on lesson 6 this week. I have the lecture already up online. This week, we're learning about the last of our ethical theories, which is virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is the third and the oldest of the ethical theories that we're going to learn. So in the lecture, I talk a little bit about about virtue ethics, about the history of virtue ethics, and the major topic of discussion is integrity, and what integrity means, how it relates to other kinds of moral actions that we've talked about in class. I have a couple of different resources here. I talk about philosophy kind of a lot in the lecture. This is probably maybe the most philosophical of the weeks. And it's the last major theory week that we'll have in class. Next week, I say this in lecture, but next week we'll do the NSP Code of Ethics. We'll look at the actual Code of Ethics in some detail. We've looked at the first couple of sections already, but we're going to go over the whole thing next week. And then you're going to do look through the archives of the Board of Ethical Review at the NSPE next week. After that, we have a couple more case studies, and then we do our artificial intelligence unit. We're almost halfway through with the course. This is the last theoretical week. This is the most philosophical of the weeks before we get back into case studies. Last week, you had your lesson 5 essay due on whistleblowing. A lot of people wrote on whistleblowing. On DeGeorge and Birch, on various aspects of their view. There's lots of stuff to talk about from last week. Whistleblowing is a very complicated topic. Hopefully we can talk about that a little bit more today. I've also caught up on grading. I just want to remind everyone that I switched office hours to Thursday. They used to be on Tuesday from 11 to 12, but now they're on Thursday. If you come by at 11, you might still catch me, but I might not be here. I was having trouble with the trains on Tuesday morning, so I switched it to Thursday afternoon. If you want to come by office hours, come by on Thursday. Also, come by the Hangout like right now and ask questions and so on. Having switched it to Thursday gives me a little bit more time to do things like grading. So right now, I'm almost entirely caught up on grading. Your quizzes from lesson 5 have been graded. All of your work from lesson 5, except posts you've done in the last couple of hours, have been graded. So I should be on top of the grading now. Let me see if there's any questions from the group before I go on into the lecture and start introducing some of the material. Does anyone have any questions or comments, concerns about the material or about the lesson plan, the assignment schedule? Okay, well, don't feel shy to interrupt me and say hi. Maybe if I tell you the secret word early on, I'll get more responses. Yeah, Bara has a question about the total grading system. Go for it. Okay, so Bara asks if the grading is out of 100%. He says that the extra credit makes it go over 100%. Yeah, I mean, that's correct, and that's how I understand extra credit to work. If it contributed to the 100%, then it wouldn't be extra credit, it would just be normal credit. So the idea here, my grading philosophy is that it should be relatively easy for students to get a B and pass the class, and it should be a little more difficult for them to get an A. And so my grading policy sort of drives students to a B grade, and they have to do extra work to get the A. And I feel like that's a pretty harsh grading scheme generally, because most students want more than a B or a C. So I give lots of extra credit in order to boost the grade. So if you don't do so well on the weekly posts or the quizzes, you have the extra credit opportunity to buffer your grade a little bit. So yeah, with extra credit, you can go over 100%, and sometimes students do. Again, I feel like I grade harshly during the posts, and so that it doesn't make you all mad at me for being a harsh grader, I give these extra credit opportunities so that you can make up that work. The extra credit opportunities are not necessary. These videos are designed to help you understand the material, to help you have access to me as an instructor, given these online courses can sometimes be a little bit alienating. So the point of these videos is to have some contact with me, both for lecturing, but also just for conversation. And if you participate in the videos, you get that little bit of extra credit. So I hope that makes sense. Another thing to note about the grading, and I've had some students send me emails about this, is that the way that it works on Moodle is the grade doesn't count for or against you until it's made available on the front page. And so what that means is that Moodle has only calculated the grades for the first 7 assignments or so, because you can't actually have earned credit for the later assignments because they're not open to you yet. And so what that means is that every time a new lesson opens up for you, it changes what the total possible points are, and so that also changes what your overall percentage is in the class. The thing to tell you about this, the most important thing to understand is just ignore the percentages on Moodle. Moodle calculates your grade, and I let that open to you so you can know what your grade is as I'm doing the grading. But what matters on your grades are the points. The points will count as actual points towards your final grade. The percentages that Moodle calculates are not accurate because it doesn't take into account how I'm doing the grading. So ignore the final percentage, just count up the points. You can count 1 point for 1 point, count up all the points. In the syllabus, there's here, I'll go ahead and show it to you. In the syllabus, there is a rubric at the end that tells you how to calculate final grades. Yeah, so this is the syllabus. I know the syllabus is really long and boring, but if you go to the very end of the syllabus on page 7, yeah, so 1,600 total points for the semester. That's 1,300 discussion points, and then 300 for the research projects. I'm sorry, 1,300 for the normal weeks. That includes discussion and the quizzes, and then 300 additional research points, so 1,600 points total. And then these are how the final grades are calculated, and this will be pretty accurate for how I calculate final grades. So what you want to do is add up all your points. Right now we're on week 7, and it's about 100 points per week. So that's like 700 points total right now. If you divide, I'm sorry, we're on week 6 right now, so that's 600 points total. So if you divide your total points right now out of 600 points, that gives you some sense of where you are in week 6. Add another point, 100 points for week 7, and so on. This will tell you the points that you need to earn a C in the class. You need over 1,120 points. To earn a C plus in the class, you need over 1,232 points, and so on. So hopefully this gives you a better idea of what those grades mean on Moodle and how to use that to calculate your final grade. And maybe that calculation can also tell you how much extra credit you actually need to do, how often you need to be watching these videos, and so on. I hope that helps explain a little bit about the grades. Bara, I hope that helps. If anyone else has any questions about those grading policies, please let me know. Okay. If there's no other questions, let me go ahead and just jump into the lesson for this week. Remember that these Hangouts are really about trying to organize some discussion about the material. I want to introduce the material from lesson 6, but I guess I want to start by talking about lesson 5. You just wrote your posts. You have replies due tonight. A lot of people wrote about the DeGeorge and Birch 5 constraints on whistleblowing. Some people agreed with Douglas Birch, some people agreed with Richard DeGeorge. They don't entirely disagree about all their cases either. They only disagree about some of the cases. So most of the people talked about that. There was also some discussion online that I saw about deontology compared to consequentialism. And I guess that's where I wanted to start talking about things for this lesson. So remember that deontology is about duty theory or sense of obligation. One thing I saw a couple of times on the forums were people, and this came up in the quizzes also on the Virginia Edgerton case. A couple of students said, well, look, she went against her company policy, so this is a violation of the rules. She went against her duties. And I wanted to correct this a little bit. It's important to remember that in deontology, what your duties are might not merely be the rules of your company. You might have more fundamental duties than that, right? So your loyalty to the company, what we've called agency loyalty, your loyalty to the company only extends as far as your contract, and it might not even extend there. If your contract requires you to do something illegal or immoral, you might have moral justification for breaking that contract, right? So when we say duty or obligations, we don't just mean your contracts. We mean whatever the most important and fundamental ethical principle is that should guide your actions. Right, so the deontologist doesn't just follow the rules. Remember Adolf Eichmann's, the sort of Nuremberg defense, so just following orders. When Eichmann was in trial, he thought that just following orders was his duty. And so he appealed to deontology. He said, look, I mean, that's the rules of the job. That's what I'm expected to do. So I thought the right thing to do was to do what's expected of me to do my job. And the thing that Eichmann's missing is that his duties aren't just to his job, right? He wears as a person, you wear many hats. And one of your hats might be to your job, but you also wear the hats of the responsibilities you have to society, the responsibilities that you have to the rule of law outside of your own organization, the responsibility you have to your fellow human beings. Right. So when Eichmann says that he was just following the rules, well, I mean, the question is, which rules are you following, and are those the most important rules to be following in this situation? So deontology doesn't just mean following whatever the rules of your job are, just following the script. It sometimes means going against the script to follow more important rules. And part of the challenge here is figuring out which of those rules are most important. So we've been in this class talking a little bit about the psychology in the background of some of these discussions. And I wanted to throw up, since I had this on the Prezi, I wanted to start some of this discussion by just doing this weights and card selection task. This is in the Prezi. If you haven't seen this before, this is a sort of common psychology task. So the task is you put these cards in front of the person. On one side of the card has a number, and on the other side of the card has a color. If you can't see that, the middle one here is red, and the one on the end is brown. And the test is to see how well people understand an instruction. In this case, the instruction is, it's not an instruction, it's a rule. The question is, how well do people understand the rule? So here's the rule. The rule is, if it shows if the card shows an even number on one face, then it shows the the color red on the opposite face, right? So these are just like playing cards. Right? There's a number on one face. If you turn it over, there's a color. And the rule says if there's an even number on one side, then the opposite side is red. Even number on one side means the opposite side is red. And the question for the question for the task here, if you're the subject of this experiment, the question is, how many of these cards do you need to turn over in order to test whether this rule is true? So we don't know whether the rule is true. You need to test whether the rule is true. And you can flip over cards in order to test whether the rule is true. And what is the minimum number of cards that you'd have to test to see if this rule is true of these cards? I don't know if anyone was paying attention well enough to answer that question. I guess I'll just go through it. If someone wants to interrupt and play along, I'd appreciate it. So Reginald says 1. Which card do you have to turn over, Reginald, in order to test whether this is true? Right. The rule is if it's even on one face, it's red on the other. So Reginald says you have to turn over the red card. So if we turn over the red card and it shows an even number, that shows that the rule is true. And if it shows an odd number, that shows that the rule is false. So we need to check the red card to see if it's true, because if it's an odd number on the other side, then the rule is false. So that's one card we need to check, okay. Smith says we need to check 2 cards. What is the other card you think we need to check? We have to turn the 8 over also. Smith says we have to turn the 8 over also. Yeah, so Smith says, look, we have to turn over the 8 because if it's red on the other side, then the rule is true. But if it's not red on the other side, then the rule is false. Yeah, so we need to check the 8 and the red card. Do we need to check the 3 card? So we don't need to check 3 because if we turn over the 3 and it's okay, so let's think. So Neha says, I think we just have to turn over the 8 because if this then that, right? So this is why this rule is a little bit tricky. The rule says if it's even on one face, then it's red on the other, but it doesn't really say what's on the opposite side of odd numbers, right? It's only saying that if it's even, then it's red. It's not saying anything about what's odd. So it might be that there's odd numbers on. I'm sorry, that there's red faces on odd numbers, right? So right, the rule again says if it's even on one side, then its opposite face is red. So do we need to check the 8? Well, we need to check the 8 because if the opposite face isn't red, then the rule is definitely false. But we don't need to check the 3 because if the other side of the 3 is red, that doesn't prove the rule false because the rule only says what's on the other side of even numbers. So we don't need to check the 3. If the other side of the 3 is red, the rule is still true. And if the other side of the 3 is not red, the rule is still true. So we don't need to check 3. We do need to check the 8. It has to be red on the other side of the 8. Do we need to check the red card? Yeah, so Reginald now gets that we don't have to check the red card because it doesn't matter what's on the other side. If the other side is even, then it proves the rule true. But if the other side is odd, it doesn't prove the rule false yet, right? We're only caring about what's on the other side of the even cards. And so the brown card, do we need to check the brown card? Well, again, it doesn't matter what's on the other side of the brown card, or does it? Do we need to check the brown card? What if the other side of the brown card is even? So what if the other side of the card is even? So everyone saying in chat is saying no. You don't need to check the other side of the brown card. But if the other side of the brown card is even, then that proves the rule false, right? If the other side of the brown card is a 2, then here we have a card where there's even on one side and the other side is not red, but the other side is brown. So the 2 cards we need to check for this rule, we need to check the 8 to make sure that it's red, and we need to check the brown to make sure it's even. We don't need to check the 3, doesn't matter what's on the other side of the 3. If it's red, that doesn't prove the rule false, but if it's any other color, that doesn't matter. And we don't need to check the other side of the red card, because even will prove the rule true, but if it's odd, it doesn't matter what's on the other side of the card. So the only 2 cards we need to check are the 8 and the brown. I hope we all followed that. It's a little bit tricky, and by following these if-then statements, I mean, a lot of you have taken computer science, computer programming, so you know how difficult some of these logic problems can sometimes be. And you have to think through it very carefully to make this work. Let me give you a different problem. Let me see if I can find this. Okay, so I hope you all followed along with that. Let me show you something else. So, same task, same wasting card selection task, but imagine that these are the cards in front of you. Just like in the wasting card selection task, there's a number on one side, but instead of a color on the other side, what we have is a beverage that is being consumed, being drunk. So on one side we have a number, and that number represents an age. So this person's 16, this person's 25. And these are the beverages that the person is drinking. This person is drinking a Coke, Coca-Cola, soda. This person's drinking a beer. Now, imagine that this is a club and you're a bouncer at this club. Who do you have to check to make sure that they're drinking legally? So this person's 16, this person's 25, this person's drinking a Coke, this person's drinking a beer. Who do you have to check to make sure that everything's legal? If you're the bouncer at this club, to make sure that no one's drinking illegally, who do you have to check? Yeah, so everyone in chat is getting this. You have to check the beer and the 16-year-old. Right? It matters what the 16-year-old is drinking because they can't drink beer. Right? Doesn't matter what the 25-year-old is drinking. They can drink whatever they want. It doesn't matter who's drinking the Coke. They can drink whatever. There's no restrictions on who can drink Coke. But it does matter who's drinking the beer. You got to check the beer drinker to make sure that they're over 21. So it looks like everyone in the chat got that immediately. So logically, this is the same problem, right? This is the exact same problem as the original wasting card selection task. Come back over here. Yeah, so wasting card selection task is 3, 8, and these colors, right? The numbers and the colors, and then you have this rule about numbers and colors and how they have to correlate. This is a little bit tricky for us to go through, even for engineering students who they know you guys know your math, you guys know your logic, but it takes a couple of seconds to think this through. You might get some mistakes. Very common for people to make mistakes in this task. But when you reframe the exact same the logical structure of the Coke and beer example, the logical structure is exactly the same. The only thing that's changed is that we're not just dealing with an abstract logical rule. What we're dealing with is permission and obligation. We're dealing with what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. Turns out that our brains are very sensitive to permissions and obligations, to when you're allowed to do something and when you're not allowed to do something. And our brains are very fast at calculating this, so that if I give you the 16-year-old, 25-year-old Coke beer example, almost immediately you can see, okay, you got to search for that guy and that guy, right, you're able to calculate the result very quickly, even though the logical problem is the exact same as in the wasting card selection task. And the reason you're able to calculate it quickly is because our brains are primed to think about the world in terms of permission and obligation, in terms of what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do. So these are the two big ethical theories we've talked about so far. And I think the best way of understanding these ethical theories is with D&D alignment charts. Let me see if I can find a good one here. This doesn't actually have the names on it though. No, these don't. No. Sorry, let me go back to the chat. I want to find the right version of this chart, but with the alignment. Yeah, let me go ahead and just throw this up then. Okay, so in D&D, the tabletop game, there's an alignment. So this is the D&D alignment system. So it's two axes on the bottom axis here, right? So you have lawful and then neutral in the middle column, and then chaotic on the far right. So lawful on the left, neutral in the middle, and then chaotic in the far right. And then horizontally, you have good on top, neutral in the middle, and evil on bottom. So you have, going from left to right, you have lawful rule following, neutral, not rule following, but not anti-rule following. And the chaotic is supposed to be not rule following, the opposite of rule following, someone who doesn't follow any rules. So chaotic is no rule following, lawful is rule following. That's just deontology. Deontology is that axis of the D&D alignment chart. If you're a good deontologist, then you follow the rules. If you're a bad deontologist, then you're chaotic. And then good to evil is consequentialism, right? So good, maximizing the good, do the good things, and then evil is do the bad things, and neutral's middle ground between the two. Right in the center of the D&D alignment chart is the true neutral, who has no particular alignment either way. This is a good version of the chart. It doesn't actually have the labels on them, right? So it's lawful. Superman is lawful, always follows the law. Captain Picard is always lawful, and Darth Vader is also lawful, right? He's part of the Empire, so he's the king in charge of the universe. So lawful, chaotic on the other side. Jack Sparrow, that's the V for Vendetta guy. Joker, right? These are the chaotic. Right? They don't follow the law. They do the opposite of follow the law. But that doesn't make them good or bad on their own. There's also the good people, Superman, and the V for Vendetta guy. And this is the captain from Firefly. And these are all good guys. They do the right thing, the good thing. But not all of them are on the side of the law, right? This guy's against the law, this guy's for the law, but they're all on the side of good. These ones down here are all on the side of evil. True neutral, this is an Ent, I believe, from Lord of the Rings. Ents are supposed to be neutral, a tree. So the point of talking about this is that these intuitions about how ethics lines up, about how duties and goods intersect, this isn't just sort of abstract philosophical theory. This is stuff that finds its way all throughout popular culture, all throughout the way that we've been thinking about ethics for a very long time, right? Not just in philosophy, but all throughout popular culture, right? And part of the reason we think this way is because it's built into the way that our brains work, right? Our brains are sensitive to permission and obligation. Our brains are sensitive to in-group, out-group status, right? And these things have to do with rules about the bounds of groups. We're also very sensitive to the consequences of our actions, and we use the consequences of our actions to determine whether people are in or out of groups, right? So we use both these strategies of reasoning to try to figure out what the right thing to do is. This is a lot of abstract philosophy. Maybe I'll reward you right now by telling you the lesson 6 secret word. Secret word for today is integrity. If you go to lesson 6 attendance for the Hangout and you put integrity in the Hangout, that'll get you your secret word for today. Integrity is also one of the main themes for lesson 6. And I guess I'm about to transition into lesson 6 and talk a little bit more about virtue ethics, but maybe we should stop here and see if anyone has more things to say about whistleblowing, because that's the real controversial stuff from last week. I know you have your replies to do tonight, and there's lots of debates over this, one way or the other. A lot of people defend George's rules here, that George's rules thinking that these are the right conditions on whistleblowing that we ought to follow for determining whether whistleblowing is permissible or not, obligatory or not. And then there's all these really great cases, Ernst Fitzgerald, C5A, Dan Application, DC10. Chelsea Manning, in the lecture last week I talked about how Chelsea Manning was released from, her sentence was commuted. She hasn't been released yet, but her sentence was commuted. She was facing a 35-year sentence, and she should be free within the next few months. So that's a pretty major thing. It's a major thing from the perspective of politics and history, but it's also a major thing for the way whistleblowers are talked about in public discourse. Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden are both very divisive characters, sort of political hot potatoes, and people fall one way or the other. I'm personally pretty big fans of both of them, but I have lots of relatives who are in police or in law enforcement in various capacities, and they look at these people as traitors and have very strong arguments against them. So these are very divisive issues, and they're talking about political whistleblowing, and political whistleblowing is where all the whistleblowing protections are for. And as an engineer, you might run into these exact same situations. So if you have questions or comments or thoughts about whistleblowing, I know this was the big topic. It's a sensitive topic. It's something that engineers should be thinking a lot about. Just knowing that you have other options apart from the direct channels in your organization can help. Did anyone want to comment? One thing that might not have been clear from last week, and I saw maybe a little bit of confusion on the forums, was just the word whistleblower. Some people thought that whistleblower might be like a slur or a slander word, something that is like a bad word, something, a word that you wouldn't want to be called or you wouldn't want to use to describe someone. And I just wanted to clarify, there's nothing bad about the term whistleblower itself. Whistleblower doesn't have a negative connotation in itself. You see other kinds of negative terms being used against whistleblowers, but the term whistleblower is just about, so blowing a whistle, making a big noise, is supposed to attract attention to a situation. If you're in a dangerous situation, you blow a whistle in order to attract. It's sort of like crying. It's like a call for help, calling attention to a situation. So that's where the term whistleblower comes from. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, sometimes you need to call attention to a situation. This is part of what a fire alarm is for. It's for
intercede.
Yeah.
Hello, can I intercede? Yeah, comment about whistleblowing. One thing that I wrote about in my discussion that I realized is the fact that even though there's this controversy about whistleblowing and may or may not be ethical or it should or should not be done, one thing that I did include in my discussion was that it seems that both the private and the public sector, including the government, is whistleblowing. So when a person whistleblows, there is no real trajectory that person can take to formalize their whistleblowing, because both the government sector, the public and the private sector are deeply against it. So it's like against everything when it comes to whistleblowing.
Yeah. So the claim that the private sector and the public sector are completely against whistleblowing, this isn't entirely true. I mean, so for one thing, a lot of the cases that we're looking at are from the 70s. So far that we've been looking at are from the 70s and early 80s, where a lot of these whistleblower protections hadn't come into place. Nowadays, there are some whistleblower protections, especially for government employees, where you can't be retaliated against, right? So if you do blow a whistle, they're not allowed to fire you. Sometimes this is harder to put into practice than others. You should always talk to a lawyer before you do anything. I'm not a lawyer. But there are some protections in place. Beyond that, it's not the case that everyone even in private sector, it's not the case that everyone in private sector always is only interested in the money. There are ethical people in the private sector also. Sometimes private companies will have ethics boards, they have ethics panels where they go over cases like this, and there might be within your organization legitimate channels that you can work with to raise challenges that you know about, raise safety concerns that you have, other kinds of ethical challenges. What you want to be looking for, I don't think it's right to say that it's merely the government's is bad, or merely the private sector is bad, or that there's no help in any of these domains. I think what you need to be looking for are your allies. You need to be looking for the people that are willing to help you, that do take the ethics seriously. Sometimes it'll be a manager, sometimes it'll be an outside organization, but you need to be looking for who the friendlies are. The textbook gives you some procedures for doing this. It talks about how to conduct yourself within the organization to make sure that your concerns are heard, first of all, and to make sure that you're protected from any retaliation, secondly. And it really involves keeping things documented, keeping reports. If you're ever concerned about something, the easiest thing that you can do to make sure that you cover your tail is to document everything that you do. If you have concerns about how it's going to be taken, write everything down. That way, if it ever comes up later, you have the records of what you did, so you can show. If you don't have those records, then it becomes your word against someone else's, and that can get dangerous. It can become a lot dicier. So protecting yourself means knowing who your friends are, and it means keeping as much documentation of what you're doing as possible. I guess I should say, I want to open it up to questions again, because I want to keep pursuing this line. But I guess I should say that my own experience doesn't come from working in private sector jobs, but comes from working with children. I've worked at summer camps for children. Sometimes those camps have the children staying for several weeks in the dorms and so on. Working with minors is a very sensitive legal issue. There's all sorts of legal protections, and lawyers get very involved. Not only the lawyers get involved, but the parents get very involved. The school institutions themselves get involved. And so working with children, because I know a parent can have a phone call at any time, and discussing things with parents is always very difficult. My own policy is just to make sure that everything I'm doing is documented. So if there's ever the kind of thing, like if a student shows up to class crying, I don't know why they're crying. I didn't cause them to cry. I had nothing to do with how they started to cry. But because I saw it happen, I will jot it down. I give a note to my boss just to let them know that I'm aware of the situation, right? That I'm on top of it, and that I'm not just sort of ignoring it. That way, if anything comes up in the future, I'm not responsible. I demonstrated my responsibility by submitting the forms and sort of being attentive, right? They can't accuse me of sort of letting something slide because no, look, here's my documentation. So that's how I've managed myself. I've been working in that job for over 10 years, and I've managed myself by just keeping careful record of what I'm doing. I know an engineering job is going to be a little bit different, and the kinds of things you have to be careful about will also be different. But so let me see if there's any other questions in the chat. Yeah, so in the chat, Smith says, I have a question. If we're an engineer in a dilemma, what should we follow? Should we be the ontologist or consequentialist? Like if I were an engineer in the Ford Pinto or for Challenger, I mean, again, my personal recommendation is to not follow the philosophers, but to follow the lawyers, is to find a lawyer, because the lawyer is going to tell you what your legal responsibilities are and how to protect yourself from any legal repercussions. Beyond talking to lawyers, the book recommends exhausting internal organizational channels as much as possible. So that means knowing what the proper procedures are within the organization, knowing who the right people up the ladder to talk to, right? You know, does your boss have an open door policy? Does his boss have an open door policy, right? How far can you take that until you get your issue addressed? How far can you take that without getting blowback, right? These are practical questions, right? These aren't theoretical questions that you can answer in a philosophy class. These are practical questions that have to do with who's in your organization and how is it structured. What the consequentialist and deontology is supposed to help you with is to understand how these different parties to the conflict might be reasoning about things, right? So maybe the manager is interested in the consequences and doesn't really care about the rules, right? But maybe the regulator is really just interested in the rules and doesn't really care about how it affects your bottom line or whatever, right? So understanding that they're coming at this problem with these different perspectives, with these different priorities, and understanding how all these different hats fit together, right? This is supposed to be the help of this theoretical background. Yeah, so if you're an engineer in Ford, I mean, I don't know what to do, and I don't know what I would personally do. These are hard questions that you have to answer for yourself. The best I can do is to give you examples of what people did, right? So here's Dennis Joya. Dennis Joya was in that exact situation, and here's what he did, and here's how he feels about it 10 years later, right? Right? Joya regrets his decision. He does. I don't know that he's torn up about it. It stops him from sleeping at night, but he at least shows some regret about the situation. In the Challenger case from earlier, there was the engineer who, for 30 years, felt personally responsible for that Challenger explosion. Should he have done something different? Could he have done something different? I mean, these are good questions. Smith is telling me, okay. Maybe I should stop ranting. Neha in chat says that she's an RA and she does the same thing, document everything and anything that happens just in case something happens in the future. Yeah, I think that's fairly standard for dorm style interactions where you're partly responsible for the health and safety of the people in that dorm, and documenting everything. Documenting everything doesn't keep them safe, but it shows the actions that you took to keep them safe. And so if it ever comes up for review afterwards, the dean can look and say, okay, well, here's what you did. You were following the procedures. And so so we know that you were doing your job or that you weren't doing your job. I think this works well for these kind of dorm situations. Obviously, engineering is going to be different. But I think the considerations for who's gonna know, as an instructor, when I'm thinking about the material that I'm instructing or how I'm conducting classes, I'm always thinking about could I defend this in front of a dean, right? If a student has a problem with what's going on and this gets called in front of superior, can I defend what I'm doing in front of a dean? And usually I'm okay with that. So usually I'm pretty good with that. But it's a good personal standard for me to keep my own actions in check. And it also gives me a standard for judging the actions of others, right? So if I see another teacher, maybe the teacher isn't doing what I would personally do, but if I thought, the dean would probably not have a problem with that, it's probably within the bounds of the organization, well, then that tells me how to proceed. I'm going to stop talking now. I would like more people to give their inputs here. This is a good topic. I'm going to mute my mic. Someone else better show them the space. Maybe someone wants to talk about this. Yeah, so recently, I mean, these kinds of stories come out all the time. So this is Susan Fowler. She was an engineer, I believe. Yeah, she was a site reliability engineer. She was working on the website for Uber. There are a lot of things to do, and so Susan just recently quit Uber, partly for HR reasons, the way that they were conducting their company. After she left Uber, she wrote this essay. She just published this online a couple of days ago about her experience working at Uber. And she's gotten a lot of feedback. I've seen this going around my streams quite a bit. Is Susan a whistleblower? So Susan is talking about her experience within the company, experiences that most people might know, not know about how the company operates. Right now, Uber is getting a lot of flack from a lot of different quarters. They got sort of beat up a little bit in the Super Bowl ads after the immigration ban and so on. So there's a lot of interest in how Uber's working. There's a lot of sort of criticisms of Uber going around. Susan Fowler was an engineer at Uber. She had some pretty distressing experiences. I would very, very strongly recommend going and reading her essay. It's very distressing experiences working at Uber. And then she leaves and sort of writes an essay about what happened at Uber. This is an example of a kind of whistleblowing, right? It's someone who is a former employee at an organization talking about sort of the troubles with that organization from the inside. These are things that people outside the organization might not know, but maybe they should know. Maybe they should know for future engineers who might want to work at Uber. Well, this is what you're getting into if you try to get a job here. For maybe state regulators who are looking to regulate Uber, right? This is the kind of corporation that they're running. Is this falling within the standards of the industry? Is it within government standards? It's really important for people to write these kinds of essays and let people on the outside know what's going on the inside. Right, so this is kind of whistleblowing, and Susan doesn't really, there might be some public blowback that she'll receive, maybe even some career blowback, but this is after she left Uber, so she's not going to get fired from the job. She's not working there anymore. So this is in some sense, it's minimizing her exposure to blowback. I mean, maybe someone holds a grudge and refuses to hire her in the future, but she has another job now, so that's not the issue, at least at the moment. So this is kind of at least a lower impact. She's putting her name on the essay, and she's putting the essay out there. So that alone exposes her to some retaliation, and it's very brave to be able to write that kind of thing, especially if you're not entirely settled in your career. So this is the kind of stuff that happens all the time, these kind of whistleblowing actions. And it helps people understand what's going on in the industry. It helps engineers know what companies they want to work with and so on. Okay, if there's no comments on, no other comments on whistleblowing, let me go ahead and switch to the lesson today. I just want to introduce what's going on with lesson 6. We're talking about virtues and integrity, and especially about the integrity of organizations. Integrity, one more time, is the Hangout secret word for today. The lecture secret word is organism. If you watch the lecture secret word is organism. But the Hangout secret word is integrity. And the framing of this is on virtue ethics. So virtue ethics is the last of our 3 big ethical theories. Remember our 3 big ethical theories, consequentialism and deontology. Consequentialism and deontology, I guess we should clarify, they're really modern theories. They're sort of post-scientific revolution theories over the last few hundred years. We've been having these theories. And one of the things that characterizes them as a modern theory, as opposed to an ancient theory, is that they're based on actions. So what matters for the consequentialist and the deontologist are whether a particular action is correct or incorrect, is right or wrong, is good or bad. Particular actions and not people generally, right? So consequentialists wants to know if it's right or wrong to pull the lever, but the consequentialists aren't really thinking about whether you were a good or bad person. They're just thinking about whether that thing you did was right or wrong. Similarly for the deontologists are thinking about particular rules and whether you followed that rule in an action or you didn't, right? So they're thinking about particular acts that you take and whether those actions are right and wrong. And they're not thinking about people as a whole. And this is the main difference with virtue ethics. Virtue ethics isn't talking about whether a particular action is right or wrong. In fact, virtue ethicists understand that in order to be a good person, you have to make some mistakes and you have to learn from those mistakes. So a virtue ethicist is willing to admit that a good person can sometimes do wrong things, can sometimes do bad things, and that bad people sometimes do good things. And what matters is not the particular actions that you take, but who you are as a character over that time. Who you are as a person. Okay, so virtue ethics, it focuses on virtue, and virtue is about excellence. The Greek word is arete, excellence. Excellence in the sense of like the best, right? So if I ask you like, what's the best phone on the market right now, or the best smartphone in the market, besides the iPhone? What's the best smartphone on the market? Right, so there's different criteria that you might judge smartphones by, right? Size of the screen, speed of the processor, and so on. And then for each of these different categories, there might be a best example. And then maybe there's some best phone that exemplifies all of these best characteristics as much as possible. Now, so this is going to be the virtuous phone, the best phone, the excellent phone. The excellent phone isn't just the good phone. Remember, the consequentialist just wants to maximize the good. And that just means having more good than bad, right? So you weigh all the positives, you weigh all the pros, you weigh them against the negatives, all the cons, right? And if the pros outweigh the cons, then you have more good than bad. That's what the consequentialists are worried about. Consequentialists are not worried about making sure that it's best, right? Making sure that it excels in the best ways that it can. Right? That's not the concern of the virtue ethics. That's not the concern of the consequentialists, but it is the concern of the virtue ethicists. And similarly, the deontologists focus on the right over the good, right? What duty demands. And the deontologists don't make any argument that duty will get you what's best, right? They don't make an argument that duty is excellent. They just make an argument that you're obligated to follow your duties, right? And so there's no concern over what's best. Virtue ethicists wants to optimize. They want excellence, not just more good than bad, not just following the rules, but they want what's best for the thing, right? So the way I characterize it, virtue ethicist wants the best, consequentialists want the good, and deontologists want the right. And virtue ethicists also think that you can't characterize what's best by just listing out a bunch of rules. So it's not just a bunch of rules about pleasure versus pain, and it's also not just a bunch of rules about what your obligations to follow are. And virtue ethics is more complicated than that. If people have questions, go ahead and secret word is fine. Neha says the Google Pixel. Google Pixel is probably the best phone. You're probably right about that. I have the Nexus 6P, the old best Nexus, but the new Nexus is pretty great. Hangout secret word for this week is integrity. The lecture secret word is different. Lecture secret word is organism. So I just wanted, last thing I wanted to do for this Hangout is just introduce this topic of the mean, because, the doctrine of the mean, this is sort of last ethical theory. The way that virtue ethicists think about ethics is different from the way the consequentialists and deontologists think about ethics. And in particular, what the virtue ethicist wants to do is they want to optimize, they want to get the best, but virtue ethicists usually have a particular thing that they mean by best. And in general, the view here is that what's best is what's in the middle. This is the view, the doctrine of the mean, sometimes called the middle way or the golden mean. I know this view best from Aristotle, an ancient philosopher, but even before Aristotle, there were lots of ancient thinkers who had this view. Confucius had this view. Buddha had this view. The view that the middle way is the right way. I know Aristotle best, but you might know some other thinkers better who argue basically the same point. The point is that what is best is the moderate view between the extremes. Right, so it's not that you can follow a rule to always do what's right, and it's not just that maximizing the overall happiness or maximizing the overall consequences. What makes something right for the virtue ethicist is that it occupies the comfortable middle ground between the extremes. You have one extreme on one side, you have another extreme on the other side. The correct view, according to the virtue ethicist, is whatever in between, whatever in the middle. Like I said, I know Aristotle best so. And Aristotle, he was an ancient Greek thinker, but he was very influential on Christian theology. St. Thomas Aquinas takes Aristotle and turns him into religious dogma. So very influential in the Western world, but these ideas were all throughout the ancient world. So the example, this is from Aristotle, is an example of a virtue. As Aristotle thinks the virtues are in the middle, and the extremes are characterized by, on the one hand, an extreme of deficiency, and the other hand, an extreme of excess. So the vice of deficiency is one extreme, and the vice of excess is another extreme. So for courage, right, courage is good. Courage is a virtue in the sense that it's an example of a person at their best. Someone who's excellent is going to be courageous. And Aristotle says in order to understand what courage is, you need to understand that courage is the middle ground between, on the one hand, cowardice, right? So the coward has a lack of courage. And on the other, rashness. So the rash person has an excess of courage, too much courage, to the point that they're foolhardy. And so imagine, I say this in lecture, I give the example in lecture, but imagine I'm a fireman, and there's a burning building. Firemen are brave, they have a bunch of courage, but you might imagine some firemen or someone might be coward. So the best firemen are courageous and conduct themselves with courage. Someone who's not a good fireman might be cowardly and run away from the danger. But someone who might also be too rash, someone who's too rash, as soon as the fire truck gets to the building, they run right into the building without checking to see if it's safe, without checking to see if that's the best course of action, or even if there's someone in there to save, right? Someone who just runs in without thinking about it is too rash, right? That's too much courage. You're sort of foolhardy, right? The appropriate amount of courage is the virtuous middle. Aristotle says that what you want to have is not too much and not too little, but just the right amount. It's sort of the Goldilocks view of ethics. Right? In Goldilocks, Goldilocks finds the 3 bears and the 3 bowls of porridge, and one of the bowls of porridge is too hot, one of the bowls of porridge is too cold, and one of the bowls of porridge is just right. And this is Aristotle's view of ethics, that there's a just right middle between too much and too little. And this is the case for all of the virtues, for all the ways of being excellent. What it is to be excellent is to find this middle ground between these two extremes. The best example of this is probably temperance. So temperance just means moderation. It means not too much and not too little, right? So not eating, for instance, right? Not eating too much, but not eating too little. If you eat too little, you starve yourself, right? That's not healthy. If you eat too much, you might have other kinds of health problems, right? Obesity, diabetes, whatever. Right? So there's a healthy middle ground where you're not eating too little, but you're not eating too much, you're eating just right. And Aristotle thinks that this middle ground is going to be different for different people. Finding this middle ground is going to be different for different people. It depends on who you are. It depends on what the organization is. What matters is that you can find these middle grounds. Extremism is bad and moderation is good. And the challenge is, can we find these middle grounds? And this is the last bit of the theory that's important for understanding why this matters for engineering ethics, is that Aristotle thinks that humans are creatures of habit. And so doing good is not just a matter of doing good at any one time, but it's a matter of building good habits so that you do good regularly. Aristotle says, we are what we do repeatedly. And that means that if we can continue to do bad things, then we have bad habits, right? And, this is a lack of virtue. And if we have good habits and sort of naturally do good things, then this is a sign of virtue. The point here, I go into this in much more detail in the lecture. The point here is that virtues go all the way down to the very core of who you are, right? They're not just superficial ways of acting to meet the rules, but they're part of your very structure as an ethical agent. And this is what I mean when I say that ethics is really about integrity, that integrity is the core virtue that all the other virtues are organized around. Let me go over here. Yeah, so if you look up integrity in the dictionary, being honest, having strong moral principles, moral uprightness, people think about integrity in terms of being honest. But the thing is about honesty, honesty is not just about telling the truth once or twice. If you just tell the truth once or twice, but then sometimes you lie about it, well, then you're not very honest. And you don't have very much integrity, because the point is, you might tell the truth sometimes, but if I can't trust you to tell the truth all the time, then you don't have the honesty, right? You're not reliable, right? What having integrity about is, it's not just about doing the right thing, but it's about doing it often enough to be consistent and dependable and reliable as a person of integrity, as an ethical agent. Not just that you do the right thing once, but that I can count on you to do the right thing over and over again. Right, so when I'm thinking of integrity, I don't just mean being honest, but I really mean integrity in the structural sense of being whole and undivided, of being of sound construction, unified, consistent, stable, dependable, right? Consistent. So in general, what I mean by integrity is having a strong and clear identity as a moral agent, right? Not just that you do the right thing sometimes, but that you're the kind of person who does the right thing. I mean, you can be depended on to do the right thing over and over again. Right, this is what integrity means. I want to say that integrity is fundamental to what it means to be an organized system. Right, the way things are organized is by having parts that can contribute to a stable structure. In the lecture, I accidentally run this YouTube video while letting the audio play, and so it talks over me the whole time. So I'm going to go and just play this briefly right now and talk about it. So this is this video. This is an organizational chart for a real company. This is their organizational chart from 2007 to 2011. So over a couple of years, every dot is an employee. The bigger dots are managers, and the smaller dots are their subordinates. The CEO is at the center. And as you go out the circle to the edges, you get the sort of lower end employees. So all the lowest people on the ladder are at the rim. And as you go in towards the center, you get more and more higher management. So what you're seeing here is the organization, the structure of the organization. And you can see that there's some components of this organization that are somewhat stable, somewhat isolated from the rest of the structure. Right? Maybe the R&D department doesn't hook up with the rest of the network, right? Or maybe customer service is an isolated branch and doesn't really talk with the rest of the organization, right? So there's all these different sort of organizational structures in the system. Halfway through this, the whole company reorganizes from a product-based company to a industry-focused one, and that requires all sorts of fairly radical shifting around of this organizational structure. So what you're seeing here is literally an organization, the sort of lifespan of an organization, and how it sustains itself over time by adjusting its own internal structure. This is the rule not just for businesses as organizations, but for living systems entirely, right? You as a living system as a biological system are just organizations for organizations for organizations, and you can stay alive as a full system because each of the parts have integrity and will reliably do their job. Right? It's because my heart, my heart's job is to pump blood. It does that reliably enough, regularly enough, that I stay alive as an overall system because the parts have integrity. Now, that's a bit of abstract philosophy. The point here, to bring this down to the real world, is that real world organizations also require integrity to function well, to last over time, right, to be successful. And integrity means having reliable, dependable parts that you can trust to act act well, to act in the company's interest, right, and to keep it as a stable company going forward. So one of the readings from Moodle for lesson 6 is this Payne article, Managing Organizational Identity, Lynn Sharp Payne. This is a Harvard Business Review article from a couple of years ago, 1994. But Lynn Sharp Payne goes through the organizational structure of business and how integrity within the business allows it to conduct itself as a stable and reliable business. So she goes over some specific examples of failures of integrity in Sears, in Johnson & Johnson's, in a couple of real-world cases where organizations fail to have integrity. And from this, she comes up with some general rules about integrity versus compliance. And this is where I'm going to stop right here. The point is that integrity is about more than mere compliance. Compliance is about following the rules superficially, but integrity is about making those rules a deep part of your character, so that you develop the habit of following them, right? Not just following the regulations when the regulators come around, but about understanding why those regulations exist in the first place, so that you can do that work yourself, right? So you can organize the proper response yourself instead of merely being driven by these external forces. So integrity versus compliance. This is a really important point. Hopefully I'll come back and talk about it in next week's Hangout. I talk about it in a lot more detail in the lecture, but maybe we'll come back and talk about it a little bit in next week's Hangout. I see people are dropping off because I've already been up for an hour. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here unless people have questions. So in section 458, the quiz looks like it's not working. I'll go ahead and fix that immediately after the lesson. Does anyone else have any questions about the course content or any of the assignment structure? If not, we've been here for an hour. I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye and fix up that quiz online. If you have any other questions, send me an email, start posting in the open threads. Good luck with your replies tonight. I'll see you next week.